All right, welcome to the Describe Your World podcast. I'm Travis, and this is episode 1. So I am with Lindz from YouTube/Twitch/ lots of other social media platforms. Lindz is a PokeTuber / variety gamer / content creator, and she does a lot of work with a lot of really good causes. Super excited to talk to you and work with you and learn more about you. It should be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
So just kind of getting kicked off, just to let people know who are listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, this is going to be not weekly, but bi-weekly. I'm going to try to work with someone every 2 weeks, get a new episode uploaded to both platforms. And then as we go, I'll find nice ways to kind of tweak that stuff out and get it out to people so they have the link to those things. And should be available on both of those platforms and eventually on Apple as well. So I'm really excited about that. And we're going to jump right into conversation. I have some questions sort of drawn up for Lindz, and I'm excited to hear her answer. So Lindz, let's kind of start with like early life. I like to call it origin story because I was an English major. I'm a writer, so I like being creative. So if you would frame it sort of like your origin story, when you're talking about early life, you know, time as a child, parents, siblings, education, anything you're interested in talking about, I'm interested in hearing about.
Yeah. So sorry, still getting over the cold. My childhood was very much not, how do I phrase this? It was challenging, and there was a lot of obstacles that I overcame, because starting at the age of 9, I was diagnosed with PTSD, just to a lot of stuff that was happening within, like, you know, my own personal life, family dynamic growing up. My parents divorced when I was in 3rd grade, was in a court case for like 2-3 years over custody. So it was a very big, like, emotional mess for a child to go through when they're at probably the biggest emotional, just in a biological standpoint, portion of their entire life in regards to puberty. That on top of the fact that I was a very proud tomboy growing up as well. And I think our generation way back then was, I think, less accepting of the social norms of like, you are a girl, therefore you play with Barbie and everything is pink. Where I was like, I like Pokemon and dinosaurs, and I liked a little bit more just like ambiguous things in that sense. So that was very much so another challenge to get through, was like the social stigma of being the girl that everyone pointed at, and they were like, she acts like a boy, she plays with the boys, that's not kosher at the time. And so because of that, I remember I was bullied so much in kindergarten that I moved schools due to liking Pokemon, which is ironic considering where we are today. And then I moved schools again in 2nd grade for bullying. And then 3rd grade on, thankfully, was at least a better time. And, you know, the older we got, it was less of the mindset that I think we learned very young, where like boy is blue, girl is pink. It's impossible for boy to like pink and girl to like blue, is the very old mindset. And so people started becoming a lot more accepting and was a lot more open to those kind of ideas. And so at a very young age, I just kind of had to learn to be myself and unapologetically myself, and learn to like not care what people were saying about me, but just know that like I was happy and that was really all that mattered. So that was definitely a big stepping stone. And then obviously, like I said, that led into the family stuff that was happening conveniently at that 3rd grade age, right after all the bullying. So that was a lot to deal with. Then diagnosed with PTSD at 9. I was also a very interesting case in the fact that medication didn't work for me in regards to anxiety and stuff like that. So all of them were basically sending me to the emergency room with just horrible symptoms. And so I was in a very unique position where I had to learn how to cure PTSD as a kid with no medicational help at all. And a lot of times when you're in PTSD, the treatment is like, get you out of your trigger. But when you're in a court case and everything's revolving around this thing, like you can't escape it. And so that was probably like the darkest moment of my life. And I think anyone who deals with mental health nowadays will say that one of the scariest and hardest things you can go through is not feeling like you're in control of your own mind and like your own thoughts that you think. And especially when you don't have medication to help counteract that or give you like any kind of relief at all, it was just very, very overwhelming. And like, it definitely just took a toll for so many years, to the point where I didn't even actually get cured, if we want to use that as like a loose term, or undiagnosed with PTSD until I think I was a sophomore in high school.
Wow.
So it was just definitely a battle of back and forth, but getting through all those hardships, like YouTube was always my escape. And so I remember watching a lot of PokeTubers like Shady Penguin and a lot of these other names that have come and gone throughout the years, and just being like, this is my escape for now. You know, like, if I can have something distract me and it's something that I'm passionate about and feel like someone's talking to me, which is so different than the ages before where they grew up seeing people on TV, but they didn't feel like someone was talking to them. They were playing a role and were scripted in what to say. Whereas, you know, hearing someone talk about their own life struggles and how they got through it and forming relationships that way was really, really impactful. And I definitely think that that's what brought a lot as to where I am today. So.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I can relate to different parts of that. One thing that sticks out to me is, you know, you talked about being a tomboy and having these interests that are really not traditionally feminine, or, you know, like a girl would have, or like liking Pokemon. Weird thing to be bullied about, but it makes sense. I know where I'm from an extremely small nowheresville town in South Carolina. Similar thing. Like, if you're a boy and you want to play with like a doll, that's extremely incorrect, and you're going to be like chastised for it or potentially bullied for it. Not so much Pokemon, but certainly some of that same energy. And it's, people don't really recognize how traumatizing that can be, because there's like an identity crisis that comes in whenever you're trying to be something that feels normal, and then everyone else is trying to shove you into some other box or corner.
Right.
So it sounds like it was around third grade whenever you were experiencing some of that.
Third grade was definitely when it was probably the biggest shift in my life, because I had already moved schools twice. This was my third school. Things were finally feeling normal in my own like social bubble, in regards to like, I feel like I can talk about Pokemon without like some kindergartner little munchkin dude giving me a black eye at recess. Like, you know,
right.
That was at least normal. But that was also when my family life exploded, because my mom filed for divorce when I was in third grade. And so there was always just like something shifting in my life constantly. So on the social side of things, finally just like feeling myself. And then family wise, I'm like, wow, everything is like exploding.
So you never get a period where there's like control, where everything's just flowing and stable. It's like one thing becomes another big problem.
Right. Exactly. So.
Yeah. How did your parents play in at that time? Like, were they extremely focused on, you know, you and what was going on with you, or was that sort of overlooked, or how did that kind of play out?
I think I was very blessed in having a mom that was very open-minded and very charismatic. I think I took on a lot of the traits that I saw her express towards me as a child. But she was always like putting me and my brother first. And so like she gave and she gave, and she was taking on multiple jobs as a teacher, and, you know, just literally burning herself into the ground, trying to make sure that like, even though life was very hard, and she was like, how are we going to make finances meet? How are we going to do this? I have two kids that like, I think I was third grade. My brother was either in kindergarten, I think is where he started at that age. And so she's like, I have to now take care of everything by myself. And so she did way more than a parent ever like probably could have in that situation, to try to make sure that we as kids never had to worry about like, if we were going to have food, if like, you know, X, Y, and Z was going to come up, were we going to be okay? She always made a point to be like, everything is okay. And she proved it. And like, looking back with the adult perspective that I do now, it's incredible the way that she was able to do what she did with such like poise and grace. And like, looking back now, like I said, I would be incredibly stressed. And the fact that she never showed it to us was just incredibly admirable and shows so much strength. And she was always just so open to me, you know, being a part of whatever I wanted to do. And she encouraged, you know, Pokemon and doing whatever I want. I think as a kid, I actually had like a Pokemon themed room for a little bit, which was kind of fun, like where you have the stickers on the wall and all that kind of stuff. But But I think in regards to the mental health, I think that was probably the hardest thing for her because she had never had to grow up dealing with it. It wasn't really a big thing that was talked about back then. It was always just kind of like, oh, you have this? Well, that's weird. So put up and shut up and deal with it because you don't want to be seen as the weirdo, was kind of the mindset that it was back in the old days. And so it's one thing to have anxiety and, you know, deal with just like general stresses that you don't feel like you have control over. But PTSD was a very just, you know, massive version of those symptoms that you don't have control over. And so the next easiest thing to do is be like, okay, we're going to get you in therapy and we're going to get you on medication. And so when medication doesn't work and you can't take yourself out of the situation that's causing the PTSD stress because, you know, you have to follow through the court process. I think that was the hardest thing because she felt so helpless in that position because, like, what do you do at that point? You know, when you can't take them out of a situation and there's medication that doesn't work. You know, you can talk about your problems all day and be like, hi, I have night terrors and I feel X, Y, and Z because of X, Y, and Z. But without any actual relief, it leaves you in this position of like, well, what do you do? And I think that was probably one of the hardest things to watch her go through and just have like the tears of like, I want to help, but I don't know how. But also to be a kid who's in a fully like pubescent body, not knowing, you know, your own self-identity, trying to fit in and trying to manage 80,000 things while also having one of the highest forms of anxiety a person can be diagnosed with.
It's a lot.
So
it's
a lot.
So what are some of your, I guess I'm curious because clearly you made it, you know, like you're here and you've accomplished quite a bit. So what were some of your coping mechanisms at that time and how, I guess, transitioning from there to, I guess, like high school age, things like that? What, I guess, since you didn't have as much, mental health wasn't as in the forefront at the time, like you were talking about. So I'm just curious what you were doing to kind of get yourself to that next place.
Yeah. Like I said, watching YouTube and, you know, seeing people who were, you know, the internet is expanding and people are making content that's dedicated towards things that we like. And like I said, there's that total shift in media where people are no longer playing a role in scripted. They're actually like talking to you and talking about their experiences. So I learned a lot just from listening to people in the PokeTuber community, just like talk and, you know, have that like relationship where you feel like someone like understands you and is giving a first person perspective. The other thing is that I really, really honed into music. And Taylor Swift was definitely one of the biggest like aspirations I think I had, she just had a totally different perspective on life. And I think a lot of people write her off as she writes songs about her boyfriends and her evil lair and don't cross her. She's going to write a song about you. But I started watching just like a lot of stuff on YouTube because, you know, that was just what everyone was doing at the time. And there were a lot of like documentaries talking about what she was doing behind the scenes and a lot of the work that she did for mental health and for kids. And I remember one of the biggest quotes was like, you can let something defeat you, or you can use the pain that was caused to you to basically like make a change in the world and strengthen yourself from the inside out. And I remember like hearing that quote, and as silly as it sounds coming from, you know, Taylor Swift of all people and things, it just like it struck a nerve differently. And I remember like sitting literally just on my bed. I think I literally had like some kind of Pokemon thing up. I had my DS open and I was like, oh my God, I can. And I don't know why it didn't click before, but apparently it just right time, right place, right mental capacity. And it was kind of, I think I was in 8th grade when that happened, where I was like, I want to dedicate myself to mental health so that way nobody has to go through what I'm going through in this, like, because this is horrible. And I'm in such a unique position with like where I am that like I speak to a majority of people who feel like they're silenced because they can't have medication to help them. And so I remember literally 8th grade, we had to do some kind of like job class where it was like, hey, pick your imaginary major, like setting you up for high school where that's going to be more of the focus. And every kid was like, I want to be a teacher. I want to be a doctor. I want to be a fighter fighter. I want to be president. And I was like, I want to be a psychologist and I want to focus on mental health. And like hearing that from an 8th grader, everyone's like, you want to what? And I was like, yeah. And so I went on and I was like, I've learned so much from like therapists. And I started like doing my own research behind the scenes of just like different mental health disorders and educating myself. And I was like, listing off everything I wanted to do. And I remember like teachers looking at me, they're like, this is like impressive. Like, we don't have 8th graders come up saying like with a life plan like this. And I remember just like putting in all the assignments and the projects and everything. And they're like, we've never had a kid work this hard on it. And I was like, if you have anything mental health related, like, I'll read it. I'll do it. I'll do anything. And I think it was either my freshman year or my sophomore year of high school. I actually got signed on to a like psychological writing company where I had to like write articles about just psychology and the way that it works. So I did one on PTSD. I did one on dream analysis. I did like a whole bunch of different stuff. And so my mom was like, oh my God, she's a sophomore.
Thinking about some pretty deep subjects.
Yeah. And then thankfully going all the way into high school, the way that my basic education in high school was set up was you took your core classes, but the minute you hit junior year, you were completely in control of what electives you wanted to take. As long as you filled like your social category, your science category with X amount of points, you could take whatever you wanted in those categories. And so I remember I took like every single social subject I could. I took like religious studies. I took intro to behavioral sciences. I took psychology, sociology, just like anything the school could give me for free, I was taking. And so that just kind of drove me all the way to college, where I was a social work major, mental health psychology minor, just because I wanted to extend my reach as much as I could. And then I obviously did like the fun stuff in the background, like show choir, because, music was still a big portion of my life. But yeah, it really started in 8th grade and then just kind of kick rocketed itself all the way forward. And then when I finally felt the relief, because I finally met amazing psychologist, Liz Carey, shout out to you. You deserve all the love in the world. She taught me this like different form of like just therapy that you can do. And it was just like probably one of the most life-changing things I've ever seen. And basically I had, like I said, PTSD from the point that I was in 3rd grade, had no relief, no nothing, was just like flying by the seat of my pants. And just, waking up hoping like today's going to be a good day. And if it was a good day, that was great. But, I feel like a lot of people who deal with mental health are like, it's either like a bad day or it's a really bad day. And so,
right, yeah.
Thankfully, with the kind of psychology and like therapy that she taught me, I had all of those years of PTSD gone within, I think, 2 months of seeing her. And ever since then, like I have yet to have a PTSD level reaction ever since. And so it was just amazing to be able to see how far psychology had come in the different resources and just like crazy stuff that like you don't see talked about, because again, like back then it was the put up and shut up and don't say anything, which is beautiful that it's so much more talked about now. And there's so many crazy things that like people wouldn't have even dreamed of like actually working way back then. But yeah, it started really young.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really adds a lot of substance to the idea that you're really shaped and formed by your conditioning, your environment, early life, and it really, for you, sort of manifested in your, interest in things that you believed in. Like I think it's true for most people. If you put something in front of the person they're not interested in, they're probably not gonna, work super hard to grasp it. But if you preview the person something that they really care about, super easy to grasp, and they just like dive in. Yeah. Sounds like that was kind of what it was for you in psychology. You just wanted to know as much as you could because in a way you were kind of healing and working through your own problems.
Yeah. And I think that in a world that was very much transitioning from, like I said, that very closed mindset of like, people don't have the option to have a boy like a boy and a girl like a girl and a boy like pink and a girl like blue. Like, I think watching from a young age and understanding like what makes people, what makes people act the way they do, what makes people think the way that they do, and watching the world change and kind of grow along with that made me just look at people in situations and the way that people act and react just in a totally different way. And I think it definitely just kind of like changed my entire perspective on just people growing up as a kid too, which is just like a very like cool experience that like was really unfortunate that I had to have had, but I'm so grateful that it happened looking back on it, just because it completely changed the way that I view like basically any human interaction nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of I definitely get that. Whenever I was little, like I said, I kind of lived in a similar world, not so much with like a trauma or PTSD situation, but just those small things that I noticed where
Hmm.
things just didn't line up or didn't make very much sense, even though that's what was being dictated. Specifically with things like religion and with education and with, gender identity, stuff like that. And I think still the area where I'm from, it's still extremely closed off, extremely like stuck in an older time where some of that stuff isn't addressed or worked through yet.
Hmm.
And I think whenever you have the opportunity to notice all of that stuff and you interact with it and experience it, you really become a really mature child. Like you have a
Yes.
9, 10, 11-year old who's extremely further along in maturity, maybe because that person is sort of absorbing information that's meant for someone who's a teenager or older.
Yeah. And that's actually one of the biggest signs that they tell us, like in psychology, is that a lot of times the kids who are the most mature are typically the kids who had to learn to grow up the fastest because they didn't have the, the delicacy, if you will, to be able to just enjoy life and come home and, play with toys and just not have to worry about it. It's the like, how am I going to make sure that, so many people are okay? Because
Right.
yes, although I had YouTube and I had my DS and I was, thankful to have those things as a kid, like I wanted to make sure my mom was okay. I wanted to make sure my brother was okay. And being the oldest sibling in that situation and being actively aware and more aware than my brother was at the time of just, what is actually happening in the situation that we were in, it forces you to grow up really fast. And so a lot of times when you're asked the question of like, so did you go to Disney World? Did you get to do like, blah, 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 blah? And it's like, no, but hear me out. I did a lot of volunteer work. I did so many chores, like, you know, so
It's like
it's just a
I was
totally
dealing
different
with
way.
more important things at the time. Sorry.
Yeah.
So you
Listen,
only have one brother?
yeah, it's my younger brother and me. That's it.
Okay. So did he catch any of that, like the same experiences that you were going through, or did that come along later? I think he's younger, right?
Yes, he is younger. He's 4 years younger than me. In regards to just kind of like the trauma and everything, he was very young when all of it happened. Like I think he was probably about 3, I want to say, probably
Okay.
when all of it was happening. And so he was aware of things as they continued to happen, as the older he got, but he kind of just dealt with it in a very different way, which is kind of held true nearly our entire lives. Is I'll react one way to something and he reacts the complete opposite way. So me, I loved therapy because being able to talk and talking about my problems made me feel so good, and just like getting it out and getting it off my chest and have someone, either just validate that experience or be like, chill, you're fine. Just like still today helps me a lot. My brother is very much the person where it's like, I want to isolate and I don't want to talk about it and I want to shut my door and I want to deal with it. And when I'm ready to deal with it, then I'll talk about it. But please do not like close door. So,
Yeah.
so he dealt with it in his own kind of way, but thankfully he missed a majority of like the shenanigans that kind of went on at that point in time.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, not good that it happened, but good that it didn't have that same kind of lasting
Right.
effect and that impact.
Exactly.
I definitely feel like I fall into that camp. Just the close the door, don't talk to me, give me some
Hmm.
time and let me process it.
Exactly.
I've had different experiences with therapy. I had an experience with therapy several years ago. It was relationship therapy. It wasn't a good experience because I don't think the therapist was really understanding what was going on. And so as a
Hmm.
result, we didn't get the proper treatment. So I'm not blaming the therapist necessarily. It's just that whenever you have an experience like that, it sort of makes you more skeptical about it moving forward. Um,
Exactly.
and I'm sure you can relate to having conversations with people or interactions where you're like, that didn't go very well. I don't like this. Keep that away from me.
Yeah. And I think, especially in the mental health scene itself, that's why I was so passionate about wanting to be someone who had gone through it and to be there on the other side, because psychologists back then, aside from a portion of them that are like martyr psychologists or what they're called in the field, are the people who read a book and they're like, well, you're supposed to feel this. So therefore, if I tell you this, it's going to make you feel this because that's what the books and the articles in their training said. As opposed to, like I said, those therapists that I had growing up who finally were like, listen, I had PTSD. I know exactly what you're feeling. And I know it's way more simple than when you're sad to just be like, well, just don't be sad. Just like, don't be depressed. Just don't have a panic attack.
Yeah.
Because that's, unfortunately, with the amount of therapists that I went through in the days, a very common response that I got was it's just like, well, you're wrong for acting the way that you are and thinking the way that you are. And it's almost this like shaming you into just like, if I shame you enough, you'll just change your mindset on it. And then you'll be happy, where it's like, it's not how that goes. And so meeting someone in a community of people who are able to like validate those experiences and be like, you're not alone, I understand, was just like a very life-altering experience. Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's not a perfect segue, but a good segue into talking about Pokemon, because Pokemon not only was like sort of a friend to you, I guess, in some ways, because it was there for you when other things weren't, but also a coping mechanism. So I guess we can get kind of come up for air and get a little light on Pokemon. It's kind of a fun thing. So I think we kind of covered the whole idea of like how it captured you, because it, helped you. It was there for you. So what is it about Pokemon that when you were little was the thing that you latched onto as opposed to some other game, I wonder?
I think growing up, there wasn't a lot to grab onto in regards to like video games and like where they were at the time, because you had Mario in his like red cap and his plumber, you had Donkey Kong, you just kind of had like the very bare bones of what Nintendo was, at least at the time. And that's kind of what I grew up with, was the entire Nintendo line. And so I think Pikachu was the first one I saw. And I remember literally being in preschool, I kid you not. And I was going home to daycare, and it was, us playing Super Smash Bros. On the N64. And I just picked up Pikachu because I'm like, yellow and cute. Smile. And so that was just kind of where I learned about it. And I remember one of the dudes telling me, he's like, well, that's a Pokemon. And I was like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, well, it's this whole thing, and there's a lot of them, and Pikachu has friends. And I was like, tell me more. And so I can't remember how I got it. It might have been the cartoon, I think, at that point, where he said there was like a TV show. So then I started watching it, and I'm like, this is so fun, and this is so cool. And then I remember, I don't even know how young I was pipsqueak, but the GameCube had just launched.
Oh yeah.
And whenever the GameCube launched, I got that as my like Christmas present, birthday present, one of the two, because my family was like, listen, if we give you a console that plugs into the wall, then you can't bring it to school and lose it. So
that's a very interesting rationale for like, let's go for GameCube. She can't take it anywhere.
She can't take it anywhere, but it also can't get lost. So we don't have to worry about like having to buy another one and have her lose. And then, it's just this whole thing. And so I never grew up with like red, blue, yellow, silver, gold. Like I grew up Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness and Pokemon Coliseum, which is, I think, what definitely like inspired the more competitive side of me in regards to Pokemon, because anyone who has played those games will tell you that like, those are some hard games. Like still to date, like those are some hard games. And in both of those games, you have either Umbreon Espeon as your starter, or you have Eevee that you can evolve into whatever you want. And I remember seeing Eevee, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever seen, as like a, 6-year-old who's like, puppy, but fox, but cat, but like dog, fluffy. And then, you're wandering through and you meet the guy at the port who's like, listen, here's my stones, pick what you want to evolve it into. And I remember seeing Flareon and just like my jaw hitting the floor, and I'm like, fire puppy, fire puppy, fire puppy is fluffy. And so that honestly was kind of what kickstarted it. And I just remember playing XD over and over and over again. And I would choose Flareon every single time. And I would see how far I could solo run it with Flareon. Did not work. But it was just like, I was having so much fun, and I learned so much about it. And I don't know if it was just the fact that, at least in my eyes, I knew the Game Boy existed, but like the graphics comparison between like pixels on small device versus like 3D models that did like actual battle animations and everything like that, like I was just so like entranced in just the fact that like I can have it do whatever I want it to do, and like it'll react, and like that's just such a unique experience, at least in regards to like the comparison of just Nintendo models at the time. But yeah, ever since that moment, and then the DS launched shortly after, and that's when Diamond Pearl Platinum came out, and I was off the high of XD and Colo, and I was like, Oh, we're going all the way. But yeah,
I've never thought about like that progression of going from, I don't know that I've ever heard a person who started with XD or Coliseum. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because you kind of started with the hardest ones. I mean, as far as difficulty is concerned. I mean, now I get the love for Eevee though. It makes a lot more sense because that's the starter. That's what you get, when it comes to those games. At least the Eevee family.
Yeah, and that's why Flareon was my mascot before Foxeon came out, was because when I was, sitting down and being like, I'm going to create a channel, I was like, okay, well, where does the mascot come in? Because everyone had one, and I'm like, the only option is Flareon.
Right.
And like, not a lot of people have it, so there's not really a competitive scene for like Flareon being someone's mascot, where I feel like Eevee was just like everywhere. So I was like, it's a niche. And then I have the whole experience of being like, GameCube was my first game, which, as you said, is like not an expected answer out of a lot of people. So it made me feel like a way I could stand out in a certain sense with it.
Yeah, for sure. It's really cool. I mean, I loved those games, XD and Coliseum. I think XD maybe a little bit more for me, but
yeah,
just because Shadow Lugia was just something else. But I loved those games, and I think my first one was Ruby. That was when I first got a Game Boy Advance. Ruby had just come out, so I got Ruby, and I liked Ruby a lot. But I remember the Nintendo DS, and I remember Diamond, Pearl, Platinum, and I remember on a Sunday morning at like 7:30 at a Walmart telling my mom all the Pokemon games were going to be gone. I have to have a copy of Pokemon Diamond.
Yeah.
Like before it's gone. So I remember waiting, and of course there was like 50 copies. There was no threat of it being gone, but I got it anyway. And Diamond, still to this day, I've put more hours into than any other game. 400 hours plus into Diamond.
Wow.
And then all the others just kind of play through multiple times. Still love them. Still play them a lot. But similar to you, I didn't start with Red and Blue. Didn't start with Gold and Silver. Actually, I probably liked Fire Red and Leaf Green more than Ruby and Sapphire.
Wow.
I don't even know that I ever owned Emerald at all. But yeah, Gen 4 is still like that huge moment where Pokemon really became my life for just a long period of time.
Yeah. That's so cool. It's a very strange thing for me because like literally until this year, I had never owned a Game Boy. And the only reason I have a Game Boy in this house right now is because a viewer gifted me one from PAX East.
Oh, okay.
And so it's a very strange thing for me to know that my first genuine and real experience with Kanto was with Let's Go.
Oh yeah, that's
because
wild.
I had literally never held a Game Boy in my hands because it was always just, the DS games and everything like that. And because of just like the advancements and just graphics and everything like that, I'm like, why would I go back to the pixelated games? Like all the new games are coming out and they look way cooler. And as a 6-year-old brain, that makes sense. But even making content nowadays, I'm like the freaking gold teeth and the Silph and all those shenanigans that go into Kanto, and I'm like, I just want to play the game. And all my viewers are like, you don't understand what we went through. You don't understand the heart and the drive of Kanto. And I'm like, that's okay.
Yeah, it's almost like you're playing two different games. Like everything from Red and Blue through, I don't know, like maybe at least through Gen 5 is all kind of the same linear collect games and fulfill puzzles and beat the champion and everything. And then they started integrating multiplayer, and then they started throwing in lots of more narrative and lore and stuff. And now it's like the collecting part is kind of just a given. Like all your Pokemon level up fast. We don't have to worry about that. You don't have to grind anything. Don't need items. Just do whatever you want.
Just full send Eevee, a full squad of 6, because apparently you can do that and win. So
yeah, it's like we know you guys like Pikachu and Eevee, so we're just going to give you an Eevee that beats everything. So don't worry about it.
That's all you need. Who needs Charizard?
Yeah. So what is, I don't know if this kind of was already cleared up, but what's your favorite generation to play?
I think just in general, I think it encapsulates everything. Like the very tail end of Gen 3, where it's like the Battle Frontier and just like all of Gen 4, like that season, if you will, of Pokemon was probably just like one of my favorites of all time. And like, yes, there's nostalgia behind it, but just even in regards to like the anime, like the Battle Frontier and Gen 4 just had so much going on with it. And still to date, the Gen 4 anime is my favorite, just with Paul in the whole Chimchar line, and I don't know if you watched it, but like I will defend that anime all day. And then also just the concept of like Battle Revolution coming out, because again, I didn't have Stadium. And so the concept of being able to like train Pokemon in my DS and then transfer it to the Wii and watch the Pokemon in my DS, do all the stuff on the TV. And so as a kid and just seeing that, it was really, really cool. I also just like a lot of the Pokemon in Gen 4, just the design and the concept. And so I would say Gen 4 is probably my favorite, but like XD and Kala were in this like fine line where it's like it's Gen 3, but it's also Gen 4, but it's, you know, just like this middle line. So I kind of encapsulate like Battle Frontier to the end of Gen 4 as like a little season in my brain.
Yeah, same. I think the criticism that it gets a lot is, number one, the Pokedex expansion was kind of weak. Like we got like 70 new Pokemon or so. And then the pacing, obviously the games themselves, because you're building a new Pokemon adventure for a new console and people are mad that it was kind of slow. And it's like, unfortunately, when you play an RPG, a lot of times, you know, the first 20 hours are just like teaching you how to play the game. So the fact that your Pokemon like playthrough took you 30 hours to complete should not be that frustrating.
Well, and like I said, for me, I didn't have the comparison of the like quickness of the Game Boy and like just, you know, the way that ran. And so when I saw it as a kid, I was like, okay, this is my first actual Pokemon game where you do the stuff that everyone tells you to do. So I had no comparison growing up. And I mean, now that I know what I know, I'd be like, yeah, that was kind of slow. But as a kid, I was like, this is awesome.
So it's like, for me at least, just the remakes are kind of a dream because you get that same narrative piece, the Cynthia and the whole playthrough and everything. Love the starters from Gen 4 still. They're still one of my top favorite like collection of starters. But it's like good software that actually runs very nicely and there's not too much lag and it kind of runs through quickly. You do have to revisit that mountain like 65 times, but it's not that big a deal.
Right, exactly. And I mean, I will say, I do think that BDSP definitely had its draws. Me being the Gen 4 fan that I am, I still have yet to beat it. But Legends was, I think, the dream that Pokemon content creators and just the audience itself was asking for a really long time. And I think it was definitely a very ambitious project for them to work on. And so I think the fact that they gave, and I give this narrative a lot too, but for people who, you know, haven't heard the narrative yet, I feel like it was really smart that they made a game for kids and for adults. Because a lot of times the adult PokeTubers that grew up on it are like, we want harder, we want challenge mode, we want open world, we want, you know, X, Y, and Z. But they still have to target an audience to the people who are growing up who don't know about Piplup yet. And so I think it was really smart to create a game that was very kid-friendly in regards of how it looks. You know, the chibis and the bright colors and, you know, although the walking animations for Pokemon were questionable, it was very much so dedicated to the kids who had never grown up to it. And for the adults, it'll feel familiar, but like, are they really going to dedicate that much time into a game that they've already played before? That's basically just a true remake. Probably not. Whereas then they make the game for the adults where it's the open world and it's a lot darker and, you know, you are able to do everything that people have been asking. And then, you know, the shiny hunting portion of it. So they really did target both audiences. And I think if you look at it of just like, this is kids game, this is adult game, they genuinely did a pretty solid job in accomplishing that mission. So
yeah, what really baffles me and what I'm extremely impressed by is the fact that for so many years, Pokemon has really been pushed as this multiplayer online experience, you know, trade with people all over the world and go into a Wi-Fi battle. And if you're a content creator, like do Wi-Fi battles and do like all these different challenge videos. And then Legends comes out, and Legends is a total single player like experience where you're going in, you're completing the Pokedex, you're doing all these things, but you're doing it alone. And it was actually so satisfying. Like people were super happy with it. And it's like, they totally hit the whole other side of Pokemon that hasn't been a thing for a long time.
And the battles were hard.
Yeah, it's hard.
Like those are hard. So
I think you might be onto something with like the double release of like, all right, here's Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, all the younger kids go have fun. Here's Legends for all the people who's been asking for Legends for 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So what are your expectations for Scarlet and Violet? Do you think we're going to have like a sort of an in-between, like nice middle ground?
That's my assumption, just because it is like, a main series drop. I think it's going to be very similar to Sword and Shield, maybe just a little bit more, obviously, into the multiplayer aspect of it, because that's what they're really trying to push with this. I think it's going to be better than Legends in regards of just like the graphics and how like completed it looked, because I personally felt like Legends was a bit rushed. And if they would have had a little bit more time, then they wouldn't have had like the areas in the cave where you have like the white pixels that kind of like randomly outline you, and like the little glitches that would happen in regards to like riding mons and stuff like that. I think it's going to take a lot of the good aspects that worked really, really well in Arceus, and it's going to take the aspects of Sword and Shield that worked really well. And I think it's going to be kind of like a hybrid of those. But I think people also just have to keep in mind and be realistic about the fact that this is also another main series game, and they're going to want to get kids into it. And so I feel like people who are our age have at least, that expectation of like, I want it to be hard, and it's not going to be hard. There's going to be challenges probably at the Elite Four and all that kind of stuff now that the Elite Four is finally back. But, I think people sometimes need to remember that like we grew up on it. And so we're used to, let's stack a scope lens on a Surfetch that has a naturally crit boosting nature, and we're just going to one-shot everything in sight and then call it easy. Like the kid who's running through with a level 63 Quaxley because he doesn't want to evolve it because Duck is cute, they're going to struggle more. So,
yeah. No, I have my theories about it. I think part of me thinks that because they just announced the new Zelda, I think that there's a possibility that sometime early next year we do get an updated Switch, like some kind of Switch Pro or maybe a Switch 2 or something. Okay. And they could use that to sort of beef up the Pokemon games and make them a little more playable as far as graphically. I also think that we could get another either like Legends or Let's Go game sometime next year, because those companion releases really work well. You can feed something to the younger kids who are going to really like it. I'm going to like it too. I like Pokemon, right. But I think that worked really well. I don't think it hurt their sales at all to release them kind of at the same time. And I think that would be just cool to have either a new Let's Go with one of our old regions, or some kind of combo pack with some remakes from some of the older games or something like that, along with Scarlet and Violet.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would also be really cool if down the line, obviously they can't do it with the Switch just with the way the Switch is made. I would love to see a Ranger game come back. And kind of come to the surface.
Pokemon Ranger, that's old school.
Because it's just a title that like is so far gone. And I want to see what's going on behind the scenes of like, why did they put Shadow Pokemon in Pokemon Go all of a sudden? Is there something with XD Hollow and that generation that came back up? Because at least in my opinion, they wouldn't just like throw Shadow Pokemon in a game just to throw Shadow Pokemon in a game when that concept hadn't been talked about since 2004, 6, right. Something like that. So I'm very intrigued to see if something is going on behind the scenes with that as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It's very interesting. There's so many things they can do now, because ever since like Gen 7 and Ultra Beast and the multiverse and all that different stuff, like now they can kind of do anything. They can make Ash Ketchum 25 and then they can make him 10 again. Like whatever you want, it kind of is on the table.
Yeah.
I think that's my one critique of the anime for Diamond and Pearl, but we won't get into a heated debate. I still enjoy it.
Exactly.
I remember my first experience with Pokemon at all was the little VHS, Indigo League VHS, and some of them had a red box and some of them had a yellow box. And if you got the yellow boxes, some of them had these cool like little 3D cards in them. And so you could take the card and move it around, and the little characters would move and stuff. And I don't know what my first episode was, but I know that I owned the entire Indigo League on VHS, and I was really proud of it.
That's so cool.
Yep. And then kind of fast forward into, okay, they make video games about this. Where can I get that? And then I discovered Ruby. And I was like, all right, let's give this a shot. And then kind of first starter was Mudkip and never looked back.
There you go. The Mudkip stands.
The Mudkip stands. And it kind of changed over time. Like it evolved, and it was Torchic for a while and then Trico for a while. And eventually it all came back to Mudkip. So yeah. I discovered Charmander at some point along the way, and it kind of got lost in history, but I still have a special place for Mudkip.
Yep, as you should. He's a good boy.
So anything else you want to kind of talk about as far as like the Pokemon landscape right now or the games?
I think that it's a really good trajectory. And, I think that they're aware of a lot of the feedback, and it's been proof that, they listen, and that, I think it's really cool just everything that they've done in regards to like the fact that there's a MOBA now, and their, dedication to making sure that like the kids still have a game, but that they're listening to the adults, and, that they're adapting and, finding a way to make sure that the people who grew up on it, who want something that's more challenging, still feel content, but that it's still like accessible to kids who are younger. And so I think, at least in looking at it from at least just a marketing perspective, I think that they've just kind of been crushing it, to be honest with you. And so I'm really excited for what's next, because, we never would have dreamed of a game like Legends Arceus several years ago. And the fact that it came so fast and everyone saw the release date and they're like, oh, like it's like now? Okay. Yeah. And so I'm very excited to see what's next,
Yeah, we were kind of all thinking Diamond and Pearl remakes. No idea that they were going to release Sinnoh in 2 different variants and all this stuff was going to happen.
Exactly. And then the fact that they just like randomly decided, oh, hey, by the way, Scarlet and Violet come out in less than a year. It's like, oh my gosh, okay.
It's all moving too fast, yeah.
Exactly.
It's going to have some kind of psychological role in feeling older and feeling like our youth is gone, because we remember like Game Boy Advance and DS games, and then all of a sudden there's like 10 new games this year.
Yeah, exactly. Apparently I found out that like the DS is considered a retro game now, and I'm like, I want to perish.
Yeah, I have my original GBA. I have my GBA SP. I don't have my original DS, but I have a couple of DS that I've bought just to kind of keep in storage, because I still want to be able to play those games 10 years from now.
Right.
So I kind of keep them on hand because I know that I'm not going to be able to buy them at that time. Of course, Nintendo, being Nintendo, is going to re-release them a bunch of times, but still have that same experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And just to be like, this is what I had growing up. I feel like it's totally different to be like, this is, it in mine, and like literally my childhood I'm holding in my hands, as opposed to just like going to eBay and finding someone else's. So I feel like that is very true. I've held on to mine as well.
I've heard Shady talking about it before. Like he has this kind of vision of sharing with his children, like the experience he had with Pokemon. I'm like, totally relate. Definitely want to show my kids like a Game Boy Advance with like Pokemon Fire Red. Yeah.
I'm just going to line up all the Evolution plushies, and I'm like, choose your starter. You don't get Charmander, Bulbasaur, Squirtle. You're doing it my way. All the Evolutions. Which one?
Doing it the right way.
Exactly.
Do you have a preference on the Gen 1 starters? Like, who do you like the best?
It's really close between Squirtle and Bulbasaur. Like, I love Charmander, but it's almost to a point in my head mentally that, like, Charmander is too loved.
He's too cool, yeah. Everybody wants that Pokemon.
It's like, everyone likes Charmander, but, like, I think from a design perspective, I really love Bulbasaur to Venusaur. Like, just, like, the transition, I feel like, is really, really cool to watch and see, and I like the colors that they added, and they did a lot with it, whereas I feel like Pokemon gets in this habit, and like it makes sense why they do. This is not me dogging on them. Where it's like Charmander becomes bigger Charmander featuring wings, and then Squirtle is like bigger turtle, and you can say the same for Cyndaquil and Superior and that line. Whereas like I feel like I really like designs where there's like a decent amount of change to them. And so watching like a mon like Bulbasaur, and then he gets like giant flower, and they play into a lot of the colors and stuff like that. I think designs that integrate more of that design process into it, and not to say that the others don't, but I really like when that plays out.
Yeah, and it's a frog dinosaur. Who doesn't like a frog dinosaur?
Exactly. We care him so much. It's Frogasaur.
Frogasaur. Yeah, I think the anime makes me love Bulbasaur a lot more than I would have had I not watched the anime. Because I think out of all of Ash's like original Pokemon, Bulbasaur was like the GOAT.
Exactly.
I don't know. Charmander and Charizard and that family will always be extremely important. Then the opposite kind of happens that you were talking about, though, with something like Litten, where I just kind of wanted to stay a Litten and I don't care about Incineroar.
Yeah, that one's almost just like a different case in my head. I was 100% Team Litten when they launched the Gen 7 starters, and I'm like, cat. And then they said Torracat, and I'm like, bigger cat. And I'm like, yes, this is awesome. And then Incineroar came out, and I went, I'm Team Rowlet now.
Yeah, Gen 7 for me, they're all like that. It's like I really love them at their base form, but stage 1 and stage 2, like they just lose it somewhere. I mean, I think Decidueye is fairly cool, but the fact that they didn't give them speed, like, just kind of makes them useless. And then the other two, I feel like as they evolved, was like, oh, no, thank you.
Primarine is at least colorful, though. I don't know.
It
I
is.
have this thing for color. So I'm like, it's like Ariel, but like, just flowy and bubbles and like this like iridescent vibe. I don't know. I was just like, wow. I had to pick Rowlet, though, for the bow tie.
We can transition into like creating. I'm very curious about your, I guess where it all started. Like, when was the first moment that you can remember thinking, I want to create something, or I want something that I create to kind of be in front of people?
So my experience is very interesting and not like a lot of others. And so I guess the best place for it to start would probably be when I was in college. I ended up dropping out halfway through. I was like 3/4 of the way through with my credits. And there was just a situation that happened socially where I was like, I don't feel like I can walk around the halls and feel okay in my own skin anymore. And so at the time I had applied to a lot of different schools. And I actually applied to like some school in England, and it's like a top 100 global university. They only accepted 26 people worldwide. And I was like, oh my God, I got accepted. This is insane. And so I had my bags packed. I literally had my name on a house in England. I had like everything. I was good to go. And then my student loan crashed through. And they're like, Teehee, we're the only international loan company for students in the entire United States. How do you feel about paying $100,000 per year? And I was like, no. So wow. I just kind of sat there and I was like, well, now what do I do with my life? And so I ended up finding a lot of content creators, and I actually started as a mod for two of them who are, one of them's no longer making content. One of them is a very big name now. And I started as a mod, and that's kind of where I met a lot of people who are even still mods for me today, or just like to date, one of the best people I've ever met. And so I formed those relationships, and us being mods at the time, we were all like bantering back and forth, and we decided to like jokingly do a soul link. And the person we were creating content or, modding for at the time, they were like, you should record it. And I was like, I mean, okay. I hadn't really like considered that. Like, would people watch that? And they're like, I'll promote it. And I was like, you're gonna what? I'm like, I have a laptop. Like, this is not professional in the slightest. And we did. And it was, the banter was good. The quality was horrible.
Right.
But they actually did support it, and they shouted it out, and they supported it. And it was just like this experience that I'd never like thought of before. And I'm like, I didn't expect this to like be my start. This is like not good quality at all. But I mean, like, people actually were like decently nice about it in the comment section too. They're like, this is really good content. You could definitely upgrade in the future, but like, this is like good content that you're putting out. And I was like, okay. And so they actually just kept pushing me to do it. And I was like, okay. And I was like, well, just teach me everything I can know. And so they had a little sit down session. They're like, this is Twitch. This is how you do it. This is like, all the stuff. And I was like, okay. And so I started doing like a solo series on my laptop that I uploaded standing in front of like my entryway of, I think, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness that I did first. And then I was like live streaming different games at night. And so that was kind of just how I started doing it. And it just kind of kept, snowballing from there, because a lot of people I knew from like the modding community came over, and then I kind of developed my own. And I was like, well, if I can't finish my degree and I don't know what I'm going to do, I can take what I did learn, which is a vast majority of it. Basically, my schooling was done. All I had to do was practicum. And so I was like, let's just do it. Let's create a like mental health content creation channel that like talks about psychology and, like has a very big mental health focus, which, is what got me through a lot of my hardships in life. And, I didn't feel like it was as vocally and present talked about with a lot of the content creators that I was at least aware of at the time. And so I just kind of was like, all right, we're doing it. And it's just kind of started from there. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have ever done it if those content creators that I was working with at the time hadn't been like, do it. Like, do it.
Yeah, I think that there are a couple of different ways you can kind of make it as a creator. You can kind of get a push from someone and kind of fall into a nice circumstance where someone helps you and they either give you that little lift or they promote you or they do something similar, or you can just kind of create really good content and the algorithm does what it's supposed to do, where you create good content, a couple people see it and it's good enough that they share it, and then things kind of snowball. And it's like, it's really hard to, and it's crazy for me because just starting a podcast now at 28, I think about the 16-year-olds on Twitch who are like building a community, and I'm like, I'm so far behind to create something. But at the same time, as daunting as it is, like, it's also therapeutic, it's rewarding, it's nice to have those conversations and do something that feels like I'm being expressive. And I think that's kind of the start for a lot of people. It's just depending on the age and the circumstance, it kind of changes. But yeah, I think I didn't realize that you started with Twitch.
I did start with Twitch, yes, because the people I was modding for at the time, they were on Twitch, and so it just made the most sense because they were educated on how it worked, and streaming on YouTube wasn't as big then. And so they kind of taught me everything that I needed to know. I ended up leaving Twitch when I moved to Georgia. That's because, like, everyone there was streaming on YouTube, and they were like, it just makes more sense, and, gave the logisticals of like all your content's in one place, and, like, it's easier to foster a community. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So I kind of gave up being a Twitch partner to switch to YouTube and start completely from scratch, was a very big, scary jump at the time, considering I had just moved across the country. But yes, I'm very grateful for how I started, because there are a lot of people who didn't have the opportunity and, the opportunity to do what I did. And so I was thankfully in a very awesome position where I was able to go to PAX East at least once because I knew these people. And so right out the gate, I had already known a lot of big people in the game, because I was just at a, social situations where I'm like, hey, I don't really necessarily make content fully yet. It's kind of casual, but I got to at least firsthand meet people like Luke and, just a lot of other people who are very prominent in the community, but it started more as like a friendship than it was like a, hi, hello, I'm a content creator. Please work with me. I never wanted to be that person. And I was always the kind of person to like push organic, friendships first. And I think that that's hopefully at least gotten me to at least somewhat where I am today. I would like to think that people think that I'm nice, and not using them for clout. That would be awesome to be seen that way. But yes, so I'm very appreciative of where I've gotten now, because I know how hard it is to, even with the push that I had, I think it's very daunting to start streaming on Twitch or YouTube and, see your viewer count at 0 and you see it spike to 1 and you're like, how do I get this one person to stay? How do I make this one person feel seen and validated? Because it's a very stressful thing. And it's like, how do you talk to no one yet everyone when you have a completely dead chat? And so starting that way, even with the push that I did, it makes me, appreciate the hard work that so many people who are starting out with nothing put in, because I did it. I've seen it. And, the fact that so many of them work for years to get out of that, it's so impressive to be able to say like, yeah, I had a chat of one person and I turned it into a chat of 3,000. And, that's not easy for everyone to do. So it takes a lot.
Yeah, there's something really alluring about not only having a viewer, but having a viewer who cares enough to like leave a comment or respond to you in some way. I know several months ago, just because I'm something that I care about, Pokemon YouTube videos, I tried creating a short Fire Red randomizer series just with the few tools that I have to create it. And obviously there were only a few views because the algorithm is going to push it to the side when there are so many other big series and creators out there to watch. But the 10 or 12 people that jumped in and left comments and things like that were extremely meaningful. Like I thought that was cool that somebody said, hey, keep it up. We enjoyed this. Or, hey, we appreciate the fact that you created something like, or asked a question or something like that. So I see people who are on Twitch and YouTube and they're streaming to like 20,000, but none of their comments are sort of geared toward that person. Like they're not personal. They're not sort of talking about who that person is or building a relationship. They're just sort of spamming or, whatever they want to do. Whereas I might jump in a stream where there's like 30 people, but all 30 of those people are super engaged and maybe even connected with each other.
Exactly. And I think that's it's my gripe about YouTube, but I think it also does have a positive that doesn't get talked as much, is coming from Twitch, where it's like you click one button and you go live. And the thing people see is like a snapshot of your stream, and people stay because they like your stream and they like you. Whereas YouTube, I feel like it almost puts it behind a sort of unspoken paywall, because you have to be able to have the editing skills. You have to be able to have a program that allows you to make a thumbnail and have your thumbnail be appealing, because if people don't like your thumbnail, it doesn't care if your content is amazing and fantastic and you're the best content creator ever, they're not going to click on it. And so it's a very daunting thing, but I think, as you said, being able to have the algorithm not push you as much as it does the other content creators. And, I don't even know what your thumbnail look like. I'm assuming it's good. And so having people be like, I don't care what your thumbnail looks like. I don't care if you're not the big person in charge, like, I think that what you're putting out is good, and I have a lot of faith in what you do, I think shows that people are becoming a lot more like open-minded. And it's not like, oh, you don't have a thumbnail that you paid an artist like imaginary number here to create. Darn, I'm not gonna watch it. And so I think that's also very cool that people are getting out of that mindset, because I have definitely heard horror stories of people being like, I don't have access to Photoshop because I can't afford it, and therefore I'm not successful anymore. So I had to go to Twitch,
Yeah, it's hard. There are so many thousands of people creating kind of the same thing that you're creating, that if you don't stand out enough and care about, and that's why I think people like you and Dylan and Shady just kind of maintain a little bit of traction and a community that cares, because your personality, it's not so much your thumbnail's cooler than everyone else's, but it's like you as the individual kind of keep people coming back. And I think you'll kind of see that happen with people. They'll start growing really quickly because they're just interesting people and they have great personality, versus people who are just kind of kicking out really nice thumbnails and they have all these bots that kind of line up at their channel.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, thank you. But yeah, that's the main advice that I give to a lot of people when, like, there's the person in your chat that says like, hey, I'm starting a channel. Like, what's your biggest advice that you could give to someone who hasn't created content? Like, my first thing is always telling them, like, be realistic about the fact that, you're probably not going to be streaming to 30 people out the gate. And so your interaction here and you seeing like the way that I'm doing it isn't going to be that easy. And so when you're streaming to a group of, 0 to 3 people, whatever that number looks like for you, how are you going to make yourself stand out? How are you going to make them not be like, oh, this is just another person in a pool of like 13 people, or like 200 if you're on Twitch, who are all streaming Pokemon at the same time? You have to find a way for them to be like, I want this person because of blank. And so for me, that was always the message of like, I want every single person, no matter their race, their gender, their sexuality, their, mental health status, what's going on at home, like whatever that situation is for that person, I want them to feel safe and accepted and actually be vocal about mental health. So if you're saying like, oh, I'm having a bad day in my stream, like, I can be like, hey, well, you can join the Discord and we have a spot where you can vent and you can talk about it. And there's therapy resources in there. If you need to find a therapist in your area, that's actually a thing I can help you find. And so it at least takes the pressure off of me, in regards to like, trauma dumping being a thing that's talked about in the community. And a lot of streamers are either having to turn a blind eye and just not acknowledge it at all because it takes down the vibe of the stream, or it being a thing where it's like they overinvest and then it's a situation of people in the chat being like, this is now really depressing. I'm going to go to a stream where it's happy. I feel like it really covers that balance of showing like, hi, I care. And I want to make sure that you have the resources that you're, able to have that you probably wouldn't have in other people's streams, I would like to think. While also being able to maintain a positive environment and every single person still feeling supported without it taking away from the content that I'm doing. So
yeah, it's incredible. Just a person who kind of does variety gaming and Pokemon having links to mental health resources. That's a super like cool 2022 thing to do, but it's super needed because a lot of these people who are coming into your stream are like suffering. And so just the fact that you can relate to that and you sort of hear that and see that means that they might get help and you might save someone's life. You never know.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible the amount of stories that have like come back. And I had a viewer who's been around since the very early stages of my channel who came to my sleep lock this last one that I did in February. And they were like, hey, I just wanted to let you know that like, if it weren't for your channel, I would have ended my life. And just hearing that, and even the last stream that I did with the shiny hunting charity stream that we did, there was someone who came in who was like, my daughter is into Pokemon because of you. And so just know that like you've changed my daughter's life. And so hearing messages like that, like it literally brings me to tears, and it makes me so emotional because like that's why I started this, you know, and I wanted to be someone who could make a change for good and, you know, be that person that I needed growing up who validated all of these things. And looking at the statistics of just mental health in general, like the level of anxiety and depression and, you know, ADD, ADHD, whatever you have, the level of symptoms that people are having nowadays are the same level of symptoms that got people into psych wards in the 70s. And so I feel like now that people are talking and way more accepting and, you know, able to help these people, it allows people to feel validated and is like dismantling that mentality. I can't talk of just like the put up and shut up or you're going to be outcasted mentality. And I think that's really, really cool about what's coming with like the millennials and the Gen Z who are just so like loving and just like, you can be whoever you want to be and we're going to support you. And as long as you're not just being a blatant, just like a-hole, you know, you can do whatever you want to do and you can be whoever you want to be and we're going to support you 100%. And I think that that's a really beautiful mindset. And I love that that is now the narrative that is happening, at least in not only content creation, but just like life.
Yeah. And you talked about it earlier, but it's a nice little kind of full circle point. But, you know, there's almost like a 2-camp system where you've got people who are like, deal with it. You know, it sucks that you have this problem, but kind of get over it and move on. Then you have this camp of people who are like, no, let's talk about your problem and figure out how to fix it. And so I think there's a lot of conversation about millennials and Gen Z and some of the problems that come with those two groups of people. But the cool thing is like, at least they're talking and having conversations and absorbing information and trying to come up with some type of solution that's a little bit different from what didn't work, you know, for the past 50 years. Yeah.
It's just, I think it's great that people are so open-minded and accepting nowadays. And so I think that there's like, you know, the catch-22 of people being like, well, Gen Z is also the generation that holds people the most accountable for their actions, you know, like you mess up, you're not just like messing up. It's like your entire career on the line nowadays.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you know, I think that that comes with a blessing and a curse. But I think if you look at the majority of situations, obviously, you know, the hype thing is what's going to make the headlines. But at least if you look behind the scenes, like so many people are now like discovering who they are at a younger age. And, you know, like if it's a situation that I was in where it's like a girl liking Pokemon, like that's so incredibly encouraged. And it's like, you know, how can I support that? And I think that that is just a lot, like I said, a very beautiful thing that people don't have to grow up not feeling comfortable in their own skin. And obviously there's still people who are, and I don't want to diminish that. But I think, you know, just the rising ages of people supporting that and, you know, not telling them to put up and shut up. And whether that's their sexuality, whether that's their interests, whether that's, you know, just who they love and what they believe in, I think that that is a really good turn for a world that was kind of in a very dark place for a long time.
There's also the harsh reality of like, you can't, it's very difficult to change a person's core belief. So if there's someone who believes something or feels a certain way, you're probably not going to change that. So your two options are like either sort of gaslight them or put them in a box and push them away, or support them and try to understand them. So it's like, why would you not try to understand?
You would think that would be the easy answer, but you know, apparently nowadays.
Yeah. It's hard to change sort of a mob mentality, this, you know, centuries of thought and process and belief. You can't really shift that overnight.
Exactly.
So I am curious about as far as your creative process, like what is your routine like? Do you have certain times a day that you particularly like to create? Is it early morning, late night, or are you just kind of all over?
So unfortunately, because I'm in a situation where content creation doesn't pay my bills, I kind of have to fly by the seat of my work schedule. And so there are days, like last night where I was up 3 a.m. editing. And then as soon as I woke up, I was editing until the video was done. But there's also days where, you know, it's a little bit more scheduled out and it really just kind of depends on like how many days off and I have a row, like what do those shifts look like? I do typically stream like roughly around like 6:30 ish p.m. EST, because I think that gives at least the time for like the West Coast kids, they're at least out of school, and, you know, East Coast people, they're kind of winding down. Maybe they had dinner, maybe dinner's about to happen, but at least they can join after dinner's done. You know, like I try to hit that sweet spot of like, I'm hoping everyone is free kind of a thing. But I do kind of have like this horrible like nighttime crackheadedness about me, for lack of better words. Like, it takes me a long time to wake up, and it's typically because I don't know, neurons typically just fire at night for me. And it sucks for Vandy because Vandy's the opposite. Like, he'll get up and he'll have his coffee and he'll take his vitamins, and he like lives that like, I'm so healthy and I'm going to work out and I'm going to do all this stuff. Whereas like for me, I will hit the snooze until 11 a.m. But I will, you know, be pushing out stuff and working till 3 a.m. no problem. And so we just have this like totally flip-flopped mentality where like as soon as his stream is done, like that's the end of his night. And then he has his night routine where it's just relax and hang out. Whereas like it's just total opposites. So I typically try to record and do everything like that at night. And that's probably not the best health-wise. And I wish I could be different. I just know that there's certain things I can't change about myself, and how fast I wake up and the amount of coffee it takes for me to become functional does not help into that.
Yeah, I'm one of those, I don't know if it's fortunate. I'm one of those people who only requires like 4 or 5 hours of sleep. So I can stay up until like 1 or 2 in the morning, wake up at 6 a.m. and feel great. No problem. I don't need coffee. Don't need anything to kind of like get me going. So
incredible.
I think part of it is I feel like sleeping is like wasting time. In the back of my mind, subconsciously, I'm like, if I'm asleep, I can't be doing things. So my body's like, all right, you don't need to sleep then, just don't do it. But then I also understand that at some point in my life, one day, I'm going to get hit like a brick wall and it's just going to stop working. My
That's
body's
fair.
just going to sleep.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I wish I could. Otherwise, as soon as my body hits the pill, it's like, you know, you deserve this. You know, you've worked really, really hard is like what my brain tells me. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. So
convince yourself that it's time to sleep.
Exactly. I'm like, listen, my body already worked overtime stressing itself. So like, why not just relish in the fact where my body's not stressing because it can't make itself stress?
I kind of had an idea for one other question before we kind of move into parasocial stuff. And how are we doing on time? Are you okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, nice. So I'm going to kind of change the question a little bit because I kind of, as the conversation has flowed, I've picked up on a couple of things that I think are interesting. So what would you say is like your highest high point as far as creating or streaming? And what would you say is your lowest low point?
Ooh. Okay. Highest high, I think, was definitely when I, at least from the top of my head, there could be something I'm just totally not thinking of, was when we did the United Way stream, and I was able to get a lot of people in Georgia together, and we raised money for a mental health organization for United Way that basically got mental health education into classrooms. And so it was like for every like X amount of money that was donated, that was like a full school that got just like straight mental health resources. And there was enough fundraising to get 3 different people, or not, sorry, not 3 different people, 3 different schools, just like full mental health stuff. And that was like a pretty hefty price point. And just like not only seeing like my friends come into it and just like the support that came from just everyone in the community, but just like knowing that that was a cause that I cared so much about, and that it wasn't just like a classroom, it was an entire school. And like, if you think about just how many people are in a school, whether that's high school, elementary, like that's so many people. And like I said, growing up and just hearing one person validate me and say like, hey, you're not alone, or like what you're feeling isn't wrong, made my life just like totally turn itself around. And so if I can do that for one person, let alone like an entire school of people, that was a very emotional moment for me for sure. Lowest low with content creation though, that's a hard one. I will say one of the things that comes into my head, at least, it was also conveniently a charity stream that we were doing. But it was with the abortion ban and stuff that had gone on. And, you know, I was raising money because, you know, I think, you know, I at least have women problems. And because of that, like, me giving birth is a very sensitive topic for me. And, you know, it could potentially become a life-threatening situation. It's something that has to be closely monitored with, you know, me and my doctor, because otherwise I was basically told, like, if it's not completely planned out, it could be a, you know, scary situation where, you know, I don't come out alive, the baby doesn't come out alive, or both. And so I was raising money for, you know, that to be a conversation that happens between a woman and a doctor. And if it comes to saving a life, you know, I don't think two people should end up dying in that situation. And I remember, you know, being so passionate about that because it is my life and the life that I'm living, and not just, you know, some headline that I see on TV. And there were a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there were select few who came into my stream and just like blatantly told me to my face, like, you should be lucky you even have a right to vote. And just like a lot of just stuff that I never thought people who had even just been around on my channel for like a long time, like these weren't randoms who were coming into my stream. They were people that I really, you know, had grown and at least had some form of like a connection with, and we've talked, and, you know, I cared about their life to a certain extent. And so hearing that was just like a moment of like, wow. Like, I didn't expect people to come into like my own live stream advocating for my own rights, and, you know, me being able to have that choice should my life be on the chopping block, you know, however long down the line that might end up being for me. And just being told like, I should be lucky I have a right to vote, or that I shouldn't be sticking up for my own rights, and that doing that is wrong, and that I should just be the good girl in the kitchen who puts up and shuts up. Like, that was just like the opposite of every narrative I've ever heard on my channel. And so as I'm actively, you know, raising money for that, and in a very dark time where I'm like, you know, genuinely afraid for what my future looks like, that was a lot to take in emotionally. And I think that's kind of when you have to put your, you know, thick skin on and realize that, like, obviously, you know, just because however many people say that doesn't mean that that's the voice of everyone. But that was definitely probably the first time in my entire content creation history where, like, I had to, like, really just kind of, like, stop and take a moment. I remember going to the bathroom and just sitting there, and I'm like, I need to do this stream. This stream is so important to, like, not only myself, but so many people across the entire world. And I can't let these people who, you know, are pushing, you know, their own beliefs. And just because it's their own beliefs doesn't necessarily mean that, like, you know, I don't want to tell them, like, you know, hey, bucko, you know. But I think that was a moment where I had to just, like, evaluate myself and be strong and just, like, put on the face of, like, all right, guys, guess what? We're going to play Gen 5 right now, okay?
Yeah, that's great.
You know?
I mean, I definitely have my own feelings about abortion and things like that. I think a lot of people do, but taking away the choice is where it's kind of, like, problematic for me. Like, people should always have a choice, and people should always have a right, and it shouldn't matter their gender, their sex, or whatever, however they identify. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. And, like, I don't want to turn this into a political conversation either. That's not necessarily my goal about it. But yeah, like I said, that was just a moment where I had to put on my big girl pants, and I had to, like, learn how to stand up for myself, but without, you know, being, you know, just toxic in return, you know. Yeah. And, like, how do you communicate to someone who tells you, hey, you don't deserve rights? Like, just blatantly telling you, not even paraphrasing, like, you should be lucky that you can do anything right now, because if I had it my way, I don't want you to. Like, how do you appropriately respond to that on the fly and, like, just, like, have that not affect you?
Yeah.
So
can YouTube do anything about that, or can you do anything about an individual during stream, or do you just have to keep plowing forward?
I mean, you can time people out, you can ban them, so they do give you, like, certain controls over that. But, like, we've also had situations in the past where people create, like, alt accounts because it doesn't IP ban you. But a lot of times, like, if someone comes in, they say something, whether it's, like, sexist or just, like, gross, you know, a lot of times if it's not a bot and you call them out and you're just like, hey, educate yourself before you speak next time, and you ban them, unless they are just, like, someone who has literally nothing better to do with their entire day than just be a menace to society, a lot of times they just don't come back. But like I said, when it was people that I had known in the community and stuff like that who had been around for several years, like, that was it it made it a lot more personal than just like a bot coming in, you know?
Yeah, because you feel like those people, I mean, maybe not necessarily friends, maybe friends, but it's like you just could never predict that someone
Right.
you've grown to know over a stretch of years would kind of say something so dramatic in just that moment, like just so powerful. And then
Right.
you're like, what do I do? Do I call that person out or do I just create content?
Exactly. And thankfully in that experience as well, even though there was like the really dark, really depressing side of it, there was also the other side of it that was like so overwhelmingly supportive, and people who had never seen my channel, never found my channel come in, who like shared their personal stories. And, you know, like I said, it's all about validating the human experience and like letting people know that they're not alone. And so like there was a really good that came out of that. That was not proper English at all. But, you know, there was a lot of really good things that came out of that stream. And so it was, again, at least in one stream, like a very high, but like a very low. Because like I said, I've never had to walk away from my desk and be like, how am I going to finish this stream before?
Yeah, that was kind of my follow-up, is whenever something like that happens, and hopefully doesn't happen every day or weekly or monthly or anything like that, but whenever it does happen, how long does it take you to sort of recover from that or process those feelings? So I know in my experience, something really heavy happens to me, like I can process it kind of quickly and move forward, and then it'll kind of float a little bit, but it'll go away over time. But I know there are some people who need a couple days to kind of deal with feelings like that.
Yeah. I think it really kind of depends on the situation itself. Like, if it's something that is like completely 100% like outside of my control, like let's say like, I don't know, you were fired from your job, like that for me would probably take like a few days, because you have that like emotional thing of like, I am not in control of the situation. And like, now I kind of have to like get my butt in gear of like, what am I going to do to solve this problem? Whereas like something where it's just like a chat that made me slightly more upset, that's for the most part pretty immediate, as long as it's not like a non-stop occurrence. And thankfully I have like the best mods in the world who are, you know, very on top of making sure that stuff doesn't fly and that it's typically gone before I even get a chance to see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, as long as it's not something where it's like, hey, guess what? You're having a panic attack now. That I'm pretty much good. A lot of times, like if I am stressed, I'm just like, hey, so I'm going to tell you everything that's on my mind, right? And I'm just going to word vomit, and I need you to either tell me that like it's okay, or you're going to have to tell me that I'm being completely delusional. And it's okay. You can tell me I'm completely delusional, because as soon as you tell my brain it's being stupid, it'll stop. So I'm going to take that 50-50 chance here, and you're just going to listen to me vomit.
I hadn't thought about that before, but that's a really nice, a great way to use like your streaming is functionalities. Like, oh, there are people here, let me talk to them.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess that kind of segues perfectly into parasocial relationships. So this is something that I am extremely curious about and very interested about, because it's like coming from someone who, this is my first real experience creating something that's going to be available for people to kind of respond to. I think I'd be very interested for you to just define what you feel a parasocial relationship is.
Yeah. So I think, and I have witnessed it firsthand. Like, the thing that's amazing and incredible about the Pokemon community is everyone is so incredibly supportive and wants to be there for you 24/7. The incredible downside to the Pokemon community is everyone is completely supportive and wants to be there for you 24/7. And so it's definitely a situation of like, if you make yourself open, you will have a conglomerate of people who all have good intentions, from like the 99% of people that I've witnessed in my like basically 4 years of creating content, is that people are more than willing to help. But it's also to a certain point of like, when you have a following of X amount of people, like how many people can you realistically and legitimately like allow into your life? Because there are people who will take advantage of it, and people who don't have good intentions, and people who will pretend to be someone that they're not in order to, you know, whether that's like gain following, whether that's to gain information, or like some kind of like personal self-gratification that they're getting out of whatever social situation they're putting themselves in. I think it's very important to like know who you trust, and like, how are you going to determine who you trust? Is that going to be someone who's been around on your channel and, you know, has said the right thing, done the right thing, and you don't have to tell them how to behave? Is that, I know some content creators do like a mod application. So like, if you want to have, you know, a hierarchy, like you're going to apply it and you're going to show why you'd feel like you deserve it and stuff like that. And so, yeah, like I said, I think it's definitely a blessing and a curse. And I think that as, people, I think it's important to be able to read social situations, because there were definitely situations where, like in PAX East 2020 was what it was, because it was right before COVID hit. Like, incredible viewers, people who were so nice, people who like went out of their way to just show like the utmost of kindness, but finding moments to yourself where people weren't following you and being like, oh, hey, by the way, you're using the bathroom, I'm using the bathroom. Oh, you're done with the bathroom? What if we follow you to where you're going? And so I think that's probably one of the hardest things for me personally, especially when it's in person, is to find a way to, respectfully, of course, be like, I need a bubble because I am so overstimulated that I will explode. And so I think that's probably one of the hardest things about it, because like I said, no one I have ever met has ever had like bad intentions of like, oh, I'm going to harm you. But in situations like PAX East, where it's like there's so many people and we're like, okay, we're going to go to a restaurant, and then we're checking in for the restaurant and we find out that people from the convention have followed us to the restaurant. It's like, where do you draw that line, and how do you have these conversations with people that are still respectful and like, hi, I appreciate you? Because you don't want that person to be like, oh my God, they hate me, I'm never coming back to their channel ever again. But, it's a very different line that I've never had to like, tightrope across before.
Yeah, no, it's very strange from a viewer perspective, because for example, Shady is a good example. Shady's someone that, as far as Pokemon content, that's the first person that I ever watched, and probably the person I've watched the longest. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was probably 14 or 15 years old watching Soul Links and Wi-Fi battles and stuff. And it's weird because part of me feels like I know Shady. Like, I've seen Shady's house, I've seen Shady's children, I've seen him talk about all these different things. But then I think about Shady and he's like, he wouldn't know me from any stranger out on the street. And it's like similar with other people that I watch, streamers, content creators. I feel like they've been there for me during really hard times, and there have been bad experiences that their content has helped me push through, but they don't know that. And so
exactly
on their side, it's like kind of overwhelming if I just drop in and say all this stuff about friendships and connection and meaning. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like to see one of those comments and just not really know how to respond without either offending them or maybe feeding the beast a little too much and making them sort of overhyped about the relationship.
Right. Because I think the important thing too is like, as someone who's, you and I were in very similar shoes of like, we grew up watching PokeTubers. You don't want to be like, oh my God, hi, and then have the content creator just turn around and have you almost feel like crushed to a certain extent, because like this is someone you watched and you like almost like idled to a certain extent. Like they were put on this pedestal of like, this is someone I would love to meet because they were there for me at my highest highs and my lowest lows, and they have no idea. And so to turn around and have like almost that dream be crushed and have it feel like it doesn't stick is something that I never would want a person to ever feel in my entire life of doing content creation. But also, like you said, at the same time, it's like, you also don't want to feed into it too much to where it's like, oh my God, now I'm this person's best friend. And, it almost creates a relationship that's like too close to a certain extent too. So I think you really have to know like who your people are and how they handle themselves, because I definitely have people that, I've grown to know and be close with. And like I said, some of my first friends I ever made in the entire content creation sphere were all mods, because we were all mods for that content creator at the time. And so it's just a totally different situation than I think the previous generations, because we're all moving in with people we met on the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And way back then, that was like, you are going to get murdered. And so it's just a totally different timeline.
Yeah. Do you think that, for example, someone comes into your stream and is like, hi, I've been watching you for 3 years and I care a lot about your content, and you mean a lot to me personally because I was contemplating suicide, and you making me laugh kind of kept me afloat. Do you think it's dangerous to respond to that? Like, do you think that you could potentially create a situation that could end up with you being harmed or in a bad place?
I think comments like that have innocence to them, because, I would never want to be the person where it's some person who has genuinely gone through those things and then immediately shut that down. Because as someone who was already in a fragile place, Like that genuinely could be a situation where like that pushes them over the edge. And I would never wish that upon my worst enemy. However, I think it's how the conversations go after that. And so I think it's pretty obvious, at least from situations that I've been in, where like depending on how they respond and, you know, like the vocabulary they choose to use, you typically get a gauge for like, interesting. This seems very calculated, and everything you're saying is now becoming very calculated. Why are you wanting my personal information now that you've done this? And, you know, so I think 99% of the time it comes from a very genuine and very, you know, pure place. And I never want people to feel afraid to say those kind of things, because I know that even typing that out sometimes and putting that out into the universe just for a content creator in a chat to read can sometimes be a very, very daunting thing. And so I never want to take that experience from the people who need that experience. But, you know, I think it's a lot of educating yourself. And, you know, just because a person says a nice thing does not mean that they deserve to have your zip code, you know? So I think it's even protecting yourself.
Kind of case in point is like, even with this conversation, whenever I reached out to have a conversation about all these different topics, I didn't expect a response because, you know, people are super busy and you're a content creator. So whenever you responded, I was like, all right, I'm not going to ask for Discord, not going to ask for any personal info, keep it super professional. Like, I don't want her to feel like she's threatened, you know, and that's a tightrope. That's tough, you know, just trying to do something positive and create something, but not imposing on somebody.
Yeah. And like, that's the other thing too, is like, I always talk about it a lot. Like, I am a female in a very, very male dominated, you know, realm. And so even if you look at just like the extreme niche of what we are doing in Pokemon, so it's not just Pokemon, it's like Nuzlocke and then competitive Nuzlocke. And if you like hone in that microscope to what my content is, like, you could maybe name 5 female content creators if you combine YouTube and Twitch who all do the same thing as me. Whereas like if you were to create it to males, like there's a, you know, you would lose count. And so I think it's a lot of, you know, protecting yourself in that realm as well, because there are people who will take advantage of that. And, you know, knowing, you know, hey, like I said, just because they say nice things doesn't mean they get your zip code, does not mean they get your Snapchat, does not mean, you know, whatever. And like I said, I have like some of the best mods on the planet who, like I said, delete anything that would be, you know, questionable 90% of the times before I even get a chance to see it. And they're very, you know, aware of that situation as well. But, you know, even walking into conventions, it's something that's like always in the back of my head of like, I need to be like constantly around people, because like there's always the 1% chance that something could happen, but it's always assuming the 1% chance won't happen to you is typically where people find themselves in danger. And so it's just being socially aware.
Yeah, that's frightening. I would not want the burden of going to a convention and realizing I am who I am, and like people are going to notice me.
Right.
So I guess my last question regarding that is, how do you keep your private life private? Do you have like sort of a wall that you're like, this is the line, I'm not going to cross it. I know what to do to make sure something doesn't get leaked or people aren't conversating about something that I want to be private?
Yeah. I think we in Georgia, like the friends that I've made here who all do content creation very close to each other, have all kind of said like, we live in Atlanta and like that is the most we are willing to give out. Like no one says like the actual, you know, because there's 80,000 different like smaller cities within cities and stuff like that. And so everyone's like, it is Georgia, it is Atlanta. That is it. No one says anything else. And I'm at least in a unique perspective because I'm not around my childhood friends. And so basically every person I have met since moving to Georgia has been someone I've met on the internet. And so like even Vandy, met him because he was a content creator. And so it's just been a situation of like, I think you know when you can trust someone. And I think, you know, you have the baby steps until you find out if you can fully trust them and allow them into your life. And I think that, you know, withholding information at the start can kind of be a smarter thing and just kind of like test the boundaries. And, you know, if they make it very clear and you have several interactions where you're like, okay, you're not using me for this, that's cool. And then that's kind of when you divulge a little bit more information of like, hey, do you want to hang out in person? Do you want to like do whatever? And so, like I said, a lot of it just kind of comes to street smarts, and it's just a totally different way of like learning to be street smart, because it's no longer a strange man with a white van who's like, hey, do you want to help me find a puppy? It's like, hey, I think you're cool. You want a game sometime? And so it's like, how do you differentiate that versus the 50 other people who will also send you that same message?
Yeah, you have a whole skill set. It's like it's like almost adaptive and evolutionary. It's like you've discovered all these different cues and verbiage and language and things like, all right, this doesn't sound right.
Exactly.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a burden in itself, but commend you for your ability to do that.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then the last thing, as long as we have a couple more minutes, if you're okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Talking about purpose a little bit, because really the point of the podcast is not only just this kind of detailed perspective of your worldview and your lens, if you'll pardon the pun, but like purpose, like what does your life look like? What direction is it heading? Do you have an understanding of what you're doing here and what you're supposed to be doing? So I guess starting off, do you think content creation does that satisfy your calling, or is that just sort of a functional piece of it?
I think it was an unexpected calling. I think it kind of brought the things that made me who I was as a kid and the things that I found safety in, and allows me to be that for other people. And like I said, kind of just like with my life history growing up, I always wanted to make sure that people felt validated and that nobody had to feel the way that I did growing up. And I think in a stage of mass media where everything is accessible at your fingertips 24/7, I think it's important to have people like that who are willing to be advocates, which, you know, thankfully, like I said, millennials and Gen Z are so open and transparent about doing, because I think it's becoming a lot more vocal and a lot more talked about, and it's not becoming as rare of a thing to find nowadays. But although it's not the direction I saw myself in, just because I was like, clinical psychology, we're going to sit you down on a couch and we're going to say, how are you feeling today? I feel like this allows me to reach more people more often. And although it's not like a one-on-one, like sit down conversation, tell me your deepest, darkest secrets, including your social security number, it's allows people to have a distraction, even if it's for 2 hours at a time. And sometimes that's all people need to get through life, you know, because I think the one thing that brings everyone together in regards to, you know, just video games as well, is it gives people a chance to belong and feel like they're a part of something, even if it's not the realm that they actually live in for whatever time period that is. And so I think that brings a lot of safety to people. And if I can be that for one person, let alone the near 15,000 subscribers that I have right now, like that's more than I ever could have dreamed of. And even if I would have been a clinical psychologist, my chances of working with 15,000 people is probably not going to happen, you know? So it's not the life that I expected to live, but I'm very glad and excited and appreciative that things kind of lined up the way that they did.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It's, I think because similar case, but whenever I started conceptualizing a podcast, I didn't have any expectations financially. Like I don't expect to make money, but my hope and expectation is that just one person hears it and one person is impacted positively. And if that happens, then I feel like I did it. Like that's enough. That satisfies kind of my one goal. And so my wife jokingly was like, I'm going to comment on every one of your YouTube videos and tell you that you impacted me positively. So
that's so wholesome.
Yeah. So I can't fail, but at the same time, I guess she's a little biased, but it's like that's kind of conceptually, that's what I want, is just one person to see it, one person to listen to it and be like, all right, I gained something from that. But like you said, it's unexpected, but it's sort of this mutation of 2022 where we can be in front of people and we can have people hear us and see us. And maybe it's not sitting in an office with a bunch of textbooks and personality tests, but at the same time, like, where would you get an audience of 1,000 people for a day, you know, listening to you? So What if 10 people in there take away something pretty big, you know, as a result? So It's like, maybe you didn't expect it, but maybe this is the blessing that you never knew you wanted.
Yeah, that's 100% it, for sure.
Yeah, so I think kind of piggybacking on that, and then this is something if you don't feel comfortable talking about, totally understand. But like, or do you have any sense of, faith or I don't know, like a religious belief, or are you very deterministic, or how does all that stuff kind of line up with your calling and your purpose, or is that sort of more of a personal thing?
Um, I grew up Lutheran is basically how I grew up, and I don't know. I feel like without making it too political. So I'm trying to like very carefully like tiptoe around.
Yeah, you're not going to offend me. I don't know if you'll offend the listener. That's kind of up to
right.
them.
That's the thing. Is the best way I can describe it is I had a panic attack when I was in 7th grade. And it was probably the worst panic attack I've ever had. And this is a trigger warning for anyone who is like at this point. That was the only point in my entire life because it was right as the court case was closing, and it was going to be the determination as to whether who got custody in the situation. And my brain, being the toxic PTSD brain that it was at the time, was basically telling myself then I was better off dead than having the worst situation in that case happen. And that was a very, very dark time in my life. And I couldn't stop the thoughts. I didn't want anything to happen, but I couldn't stop the voice in my head that told me I was better off dead. And I remember I had a full-blown panic attack, and I remember telling my mom and having that reaction of her breaking down and me trying to reassure of I don't want anything to happen. I just don't know how to make it stop. And I remember we were driving around, and she called my grandma to come down just so I was never alone in the house, just so I always felt like I had someone if something happened. And I remember we were at a park by a lake, and I literally just remember getting out of the car. I was walking just in the field to stretch my legs and just, walk off the panic attack because you have so much adrenaline when it hits you. And I remember I felt like I was going to puke, so I lay down, and I just remember saying if there's a reason for me to be here, let me know. And it was literally me begging in that moment, and I literally broke down crying. And the minute, because I said it out loud, the minute the word left my mouth, my panic attack stopped, instantaneously. And I have never had a moment in my life where any of that had ever happened. Because trust me, I have begged for panic attacks to stop before. This was not the first time. And that was the first time I'd ever felt anything that was like that. And I still can't describe it. And it was probably still the most surreal thing I've ever felt in my entire life. And I remember going from tears and feeling like I was going to throw up and saying some of the darkest stuff I've ever said in my life to my mom and just being I want to go home. And she's on the phone with my grandma. And she's you want to what?
Yeah.
And I was I'm okay. I want to go home. And she's you're okay. I don't need to take you to the emergency room. And I'm no, I'm okay. And it was really from that moment where I was I had that mentality of I want to do this so no one had to have that panic attack that I just felt, because that was probably my lowest low I've ever had in my entire life. And that's just kind of where everything changed. And I will say, I'm probably not the best at, expressing, the Christian beliefs in a church setting, but I feel like I adapted a lot of the principles of, loving people and, believing that even in people who have done bad things in life, that there is still good in a lot of people. And I think carrying those beliefs, and even though you might not understand why someone's acting the way that they are, maybe they have stuff going on at home. And like I said, a lot of it ties into, how I grew up and the perspective that I gained through all the hardships is people aren't always what they see on the outside, and giving people that benefit of the doubt and being willing to learn that maybe the person who's mean to you in the gas station is really because he doesn't know how he's going to feed his 3 kids at home. The person who's constantly having a mental breakdown at school, who's the class bully, maybe because he doesn't know if his parents are going to get arrested tonight or if the power is going to be on when he goes home so he can take a shower. There's so much more to people than a lot of people are willing to give the time to learn. And I think choosing to lead a life of kindness and being willing to understand people, even when it's hard, is the main thing that I've taken away from a lot of my faith growing up.
That's absolutely crazy. It's almost like that moment where that panic attack was pulled away from you was that moment of clarity. I have a direction, and not only did I get relief and I can breathe and it's okay, but I also understand where I'm kind of pointing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about my own faith journey or my own beliefs and things like that, but I have had a very similar experience, not necessarily in panic mode, but sort of in a different emotional, heavily emotional setting. So I can relate to those feelings, and it does sort of change you. Like, it's something that you don't forget.
Yeah, like that sensation of just going from like the most extreme fight or flight I feel like I had felt in quite a long time to just like warm, fuzzy, just like airiness was just like a complete 180 and just like the snap of a finger. And like I said, I had begged for panic attacks to stop before, and I can tell you they don't stop like that.
Yeah,
So,
I kind of, yeah, I feel that the warm fuzzy airiness is a great way to describe it. It's almost like you're wrapped up and like you can kind of let go. Something else is there.
yeah.
It's very intriguing, and if we had another 2 hours, I would definitely go into
Yeah.
it. But so finally, just to kind of wrap up, and then we'll go into the last segment. My last question is, what is your narrative voice? What do you have to say? And if you died tomorrow, what do you want people to remember? Like, what do you want to leave behind? Yeah, heaviest one for last. So we had to save it to the end because if anybody made it this far, they get hit with the truck.
Yeah, they know my deepest, darkest secrets. I feel like if I could leave behind one thing, like if I were to die tomorrow, heaven forbid, would be to, like I said, just like love others and to know that regardless of, you know, what color your skin is, who you decide to love, what you believe in, like none of that stuff matters, because at the end of the day, we are all human. It doesn't matter where you were, you know, dropped in the world. You know, everyone is a product of circumstance of how they grew up and, you know, the situations that they had. And I think that believing in the good for a lot of people is something that's very, very important and something that wasn't talked about as much that is now thankfully coming to light. And I think that a lot of problems in the world would be solved if people were to just stop, breathe, take a minute, and be willing to understand people on a more one-to-one connection instead of making an entire assumption on someone based off of like a tweet that they saw where they were like, oh, this was in ill taste, this person's a jerk, when like little did they know that was like satire completely, and that they were making an inside joke based off a meme they saw with their friends that they saw last night. Like, there's so much more to people. And like, obviously, like, yes, there are some things you should say on the internet and stuff that you shouldn't. But I think loving people is incredibly important. And like I said, being the person who's not afraid to stick up for people, because, you know, had one person stuck up for me at recess so I didn't get a black eye for saying Pikachu's cool, you know, like that would have changed a lot for me. And so I think it's calling upon people to not be afraid to be the person that's there for people when other people aren't.
And I think too, playing devil's advocate, if you hadn't got that black eye, would you have this platform?
Exactly.
Who knows?
Exactly.
It's kind of like it ties back into that whole direction and kind of finding your purpose, and it's just a nice bow to put on the whole thing. It's like, you know, you have to mourn and grieve the really bad experiences, but then at the same time look for whatever come out of the other side and maybe what was the result, and it might not be that bad.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't think I was going to live to see the age 22 growing up. And so being able to have the perspective of just like where I am now and like knowing how much that would have meant to the little Lindsay who was like 4 years old and felt like they were lost and, you know, that they weren't even going to live to make it that far, you know, it's something I never could have dreamed would be the situation that I am. And like knowing that like I've met a lot of the people that I grew up watching, and, you know, like that's something I never would have even been able to like fathom or dream about. So it's a very, very cool full circle that my life ended up being. So I'm very, very grateful that I'm where I am now, because I would not be here if it weren't for like, you know, just the right person pushing me at the right time, or, you know, like conveniently finding the right therapist who said the right thing at the right time. You know, like there's so many things where had they not happened, I would not be here right now.
Yeah, I really buy into that. I don't know. I can't remember if it's Bruce Almighty or Evan Almighty, but there's like that one random act of kindness. It's
Yeah,
like
the
just a
butterfly
little
effect.
kindness. You never know how far that's going to go. Like it seems like it's traveled with you pretty far.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate all of the conversation. It's been almost 2 hours. I'm sure you're exhausted. Your brain's probably like totally worked out. I got 10 questions for you, and these are going to be super quick. So just first thing that comes to mind, I didn't send these over to Lindz for those listening in advance because I want these to come off the top of her head. So a couple words, one sentence, we'll take care of it.
Okay.
You're ready.
I was born ready.
Okay. All right. What is your favorite word?
Oh. Oh, wow. Okay, so there are questions like this. I like the word iridescent. I don't know why. I feel like it has a feeling to the word.
Okay, that's fair. I'm a big word guy. Like I said, I was an English and creative writing major, so I love words. What's your least favorite word?
Ooh. It's very weird, and it translates into this, like, it's not a phobia that I have, but it's coin. I hate that word. I don't know why.
Never heard that one.
Yeah, it's very weird. Everyone's always like moist, but it's a whole separate side of me that we don't have time to get into.
What if you read it? Does it bother you the same amount?
No.
Okay. What excites you?
Ooh. Making people happy and knowing that I can, like I have the potential to, have a positive outcome by an action that I do.
Okay. What upsets you?
People who are rude, and just like, obviously I just gave the whole speech of just like, giving people the benefit of the doubt. But like, this really is more towards the people who just like have no human remorse, who just go out of their way every single day to just say horrible things to people. And it's one thing to be like, oh shoot, I didn't open the door for them. That was probably on me. Or to have a bad day. But we're talking like the people who are just like slam dunking people for just like no reason. That.
Have you ever, how much time have you spent in North Carolina?
I visited Charlotte a few times to see Vandy.
Okay. Yeah. I'm about
not a ton.
I'm in the Charlotte area, but if you've been in the area, Charlotte drivers are, they fall under that category.
Yeah. There's something else. I can tell you that much.
They're special. Sorry for the Charlotte listeners. What sound or noise do you love? Acoustic
guitar.
Okay.
That or campfire.
Can you play anything, just as an aside?
Yeah. To tie into like me saying that I really got into music, I taught myself to play guitar. So awesome. I did that, and like I said, acoustic guitar is like to date just like it's so soothing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Again, this is a total like side to me. I hate the sound of change.
Coins in
like
the
if
sound
someone's
of
like
change.
playing in their it's a thing, and I don't know why. I've had it since birth, and I can't tell you why either. It's not like there's a rationale behind it of like spiders are creepy, therefore I don't like it. It's just like it's in my bones. It's like a repulsion like reaction.
I mean, this is all
it's a very
great to
strange
know
fact.
For people who plan on coming to the conventions. This is great to know. Like they won't bring their
Do
coins.
not play with change in your pockets. I'm begging you.
We got a few more. What motivates you to act every day when you wake up?
I think it's just like the anticipation of what's to come. Like I think the blessing with my job is that like every single day could bring something totally new and totally different. It's a lot of freedom that a lot of people don't have with their job. And so I think that being able to have that optimistic freedom of like, I genuinely don't know what could happen today. Like I could stream Spider-Man and I could find like a totally different group of people who are like, love Spider-Man, love you. Let's, become the most loyal followers you've ever seen. And we're going to have so many memes, like the potential for anything like that to happen. And like I said, it could even be the situation of like, this was the stream that like distracted me in the middle of my panic attack. And I've never had that happen before. So thank you for like doing the thing that nothing else in my life has. Like that opportunity every single day, like, is something that I will never in a million years ever take for granted.
Awesome. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Okay, so if I negate psychology altogether, as a fun fact to tie into this, as a kindergartner, I told people I wanted to paint trains because I thought Thomas the Train was really cool and that colors made people happy. And so I told people as a kid I wanted to paint trains. I honestly could see myself in education. I feel like I would either like teach psychology or like some kind of like creative writing stuff. So anything that would kind of be in that realm. That was kind of my backup plan had psychology just like fallen through and was like conveniently no longer a subject you could study ever.
Cool.
But yeah.
You're very sensory. Colors, sounds, all of that stuff is like very stimulating for you.
I'm a very right-brained individual. The minute you put numbers or analytics, it's just out the brain.
Same. Yeah. I always dreaded math and science. Give me art, history, and English. That's what I wanted.
Yep. Exactly.
What profession would you not like to do?
Math. It doesn't make sense
teacher.
In my head. Like it's immediate. I'm not good at math. I will never pretend to be good at math. Anytime there's math related on stream, I'm like, okay, viewer who's good at math, tell me what this is because I will probably calculate it wrong. And it's really just my brain doesn't understand arithmetic. So I can know how to do it and I can tell you how to do the formula, but when it comes to plugging the numbers, it's wrong every time. I can't do it for some reason.
Interesting. Okay. I don't think that math's gonna make or break the content creation, fortunately.
Thankfully. Yeah. Physics was also just like my class from hell. It was like created just to like torture me with everything that I'm bad at in one sitting.
And last one, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh my gosh. Whew.
So you gotta save the best for last.
Dang. Okay. Wow. I've never thought of this before. I guess it would probably be that, like, I guess in that moment of clarity that I had where it was like the warmth and, you know, like that snap of the finger, like I said, I feel like it would be like you did something right, you know, and like knowing that even if it wasn't like the, you know, I'm going to be a nun for the rest of my life and, you know, worship and, you know, do the, you know, the whole 9 yards. It was the making a difference in people's lives and hopefully saving a few along the way that was deemed as enough. And like, I don't want to say in trade of that because that makes it sound like an exchange, but, you know, like I interpreted that and did what I did with my life and that was deemed as good.
Nice. You came up with that very quickly. That's good.
Thank you. I was like, really? That you got me with that one.
Yeah. So for people listening, there's a show in the 90s called Inside the Actors Studio, and it was hosted by James Lipton, rest in peace. And he always ended his show with 10 questions, most of which I pulled directly, like totally took from the list that he had, some of which I changed just to kind of keep things clean. For the
Fair.
sake of kind of making the content a little bit more accessible to people. But for the most part, I did take those questions sort of verbatim. So for people who are interested, go check it out. Very, very informative about certain celebrities, actors, writers, things like that. So I'm just going to give a couple of closing thoughts, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for last words. And then I want you to sort of shout yourself out, tell people where to find you, and tell people how to access you after they hear the podcast later on. So sort of some of the things that I pulled away, and I think it's really important for people listening and watching, particularly your viewers and your followers, because I think some of them will eventually find their way to the episode or the video, is that as much as people that we sort of watch and engage with on these platforms are just sort of larger than life whenever we are watching and engaging with them, they're people, they're humans, and they have all these real feelings and real experiences, and they go through a lot of stuff. And so it's important to sort of kind of stay grounded and remind yourself of that whenever you're engaging with them and interacting with them, and just be super respectful and understand that sometimes those people are overwhelmed, and sometimes those people are dealing with some of the same things you are. It's just that you don't get to see that side. And I think kind of doing that and absorbing all the information that we talked about is just going to make overall someone who's listening a lot more informed and a lot more prepared for those conversations and interactions in the future. For people who are listening, this is the first episode. I'm really excited. I thought it went super well. It could be totally wrong, but
you did great. I'm so proud.
Thanks. So like I said at the beginning, every 2 weeks, that's kind of my goal. I do have a recording schedule for this week, so we should be on time, at least for now. So if you see another episode pop up, I'd really encourage everyone to hit follow in Spotify or Apple. And then on YouTube, there will be a corresponding video. So you can kind of watch our conversation as well. Hit subscribe if you're intrigued by that. Leave a like if you don't mind. And that's sort of all I have to say. I really appreciate you and your time. I thought it was great conversation, a lot of great kind of back and forth. Thank you for coming on and giving me 2 hours when you really didn't have to. That was extremely compassionate and kind of you. So I'm going to turn over to you so you can close us out with just whatever you like to say.
Yeah. Thank you again for having me. It was an honor to be your first guest on your first podcast. And like I said, I know I have a habit of just talking and not stopping. So thank you for allowing me to talk, probably way more than you were expecting. But yeah, like I think you made a lot of good points, and I hope that people can at least take something away from this, because, I talk a little bit about my life on, my live streams, but I think that this is probably the first time anyone has ever been able to know, like I said, the deepest, darkest secrets and like the things that I've told very few people in my life, for fear of judgment or whatever that is. And so, I hope that people walk out with at least maybe, hopefully, a different perspective on either me or just social situations and, how to treat others, hopefully. But yeah, I think spreading kindness in a world where there's a lot of darkness and a lot of people who don't feel understood is incredibly important. And the fact that I've been given a platform so graciously and have been hopefully able to make an impact on people's lives means a lot. So thank you to everyone who's listening, and please support Travis and the podcast and everything that's going on, because he's doing good things. And like I said, it's an honor to be the first. So
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Where can people find you?
YouTube. My channel is Lindz, Lindz, or you can find me on Twitter or Instagram with Lindz Vids, Lindz Vidzz. And then I technically have a Twitch that's also Lindz Vids, same spelling as the first two, but I definitely have YouTube as my main platform. So it'll be a rarity if you find me on Twitch, but you could be the few that know that I'm there.
Yeah, I remember very vaguely a couple times in the past seeing you kind of bouncing back and forth and stuff, and it kind of conflicted on where to go and how to get to you. But ultimately, it all kind of makes sense. But definitely more of a YouTube frog than a Twitch frog.
Exactly.
All right. Well, I'm going to close this out with intro music. Going to stop the recording here, and then if, like I said earlier, if you'll just give it a couple seconds, it'll go ahead and finish buffering and uploading our content, and we'll be good to go.
Cool.
All righty.